I've actually used exactly the same armies that I used in the first game, no changes in the order of battle. And just to experiment, again, I don't generally put out the terrain according to the DBA rules, or what I like to think of as the DBA competition rules. I set up what I think is an interesting battlefield. So I thought that it was going to be very difficult for the Macedonians to be able to handle an army with so much cavalry, unless they've got something they can do with their flanks. So in this particular battlefield, I've given them 2 areas of bad going to pop themselves between, even though I'm actually going to have the Persians move first as the defenders, because it's still Alexander invading Persia, presumably. So they've got 2 areas of bad going that they can rest their flanks on, as we can see here. And but of course Alexander is rather short in light troops in that he's got 1 unit of Siloi and 1 unit of the Hypaspists, which are solid auxilia, and they are actually on the flanks right now. There are the Hypaspists, and then down the other end we can see the Siloi. We can also see we have some light cavalry here and cavalry ready to move up the flanks, the extreme flanks, into position, and basically to avoid being outflanked, Alexander has chosen to deploy in 1 line of phalanx, which of course is not ideal, but if it's doubled up, the Macedonian line becomes incredibly short. And then on the Persian side, Darius has decided to go with all his cavalry strength on 1 wing. Darius set up first as the defender, I should point that out. So he's put all his cavalry on 1 wing, and it's a traditional formation of the fastest troops at the end, and then gradually getting slower and slower. But putting the scythe chariots in the middle in order to maximize their chance of being able to contact the pikes, who they will quick kill if they can beat them. And then we have some other troops, including the Horde and the mercenary hoplites, and then down at the end we have the Persian light troops, which are ready to attempt a flanking of the Macedonian right, and also will give a good account of themselves in the bad terrain which stands more or less in front of them. So we're ready to start the battle, and the Persians, being the defenders, will go first. Right, Darius rolled 4 pips, and this is the situation at the end of the first Persian bound. No shooting, no combat. The Persians have decided that what they want to do is basically move themselves over in this direction, most of the army, and then come in this way so as not to get, as we might imagine, tangled up in the bad going, but also so as try to get clear of the influence of the Hypaspis, which could be lurking in the bad going and ready to interfere with people in the flank. So they're trying to basically square off against the thinned line of the phalanx, which most of these units have a fairly reasonable combat factors when facing them, and indeed the knights and the scythe chariots can have quick kills on the pikes. This has left the hordes behind, not surprisingly. Also, the slow-moving hoplites have not moved. The other thing that's happened is that it looks like the auxilia are going to be very useful to get over here and either be in the open down here, working their way down the flank, or indeed moving nicely through the bad going down here, trying to keep them out of range. Remembering the last battle, trying to keep them completely out of range of the bolt thrower, because that messed with them rather savagely in the last battle. So that's going on there. But then the other significant move was that from the extreme left flank of the Persian line, we had a move of 2 moves, 6 base widths, by the Persian Seloi who have come across here. The idea here is to get them involved in contesting this area of bad going, so they'll be able to mix it up with the Hypaspists, and obviously then they're not as powerful as the Hypaspists, but they will be. They will give us at least some kind of troops that are useful in bad going, and that's it for the Persian first bound. This is the end of the Macedonian first bound, and Alexander rolled 5 for pips, giving him plenty of scope. And what has been done is the cavalry that was over here has gone around the bad going and is keeping an eye on the flank over there. It would have been nice to have been able to do that with the cavalry over here as well, up this way, but there wasn't enough. There weren't enough pips for that. So the Hypaspists, that was 1 pip. Hypaspists moves into here and is getting ready to keep an eye on the Persian flank, as it may choose to go past there. Any Persian cavalry entering the bad going is going to be at a huge disadvantage, but of course they still have to watch out for the possibility of being flanked or whatever. Things in the centre stayed completely stationary, and then the Alexandrian Seloi, the Agrianians, had to move out of the way of the bolt thrower so that it could line itself up to keep an eye on these Persian auxilia that are coming over this way. So they had to get out of the way, so I figured they might as well do something useful. So they've moved up here into the bad going, but not too far forward, such as to get in the way of the bolt thrower. Then we have the bolt thrower itself has rotated and is keeping an eye on the expected avenue of approach of the Persian auxilia. Now, if the Persian auxilia decide to outwit the artillery, as it were, and go this way instead, which would be in a bit of an odd direction, but if they do, then of course the artillery will have nothing to shoot at, and it does take 2 pips to move the artillery. Something I think I may have missed in the last battle. But so yes, artillery very slow and lumbering, but can be quite effective if aimed at the right target. And that's the end of the. So there's no shooting because they moved, of course, and that's the end of the Macedonian first bound. Well, here we are on the 29th, and Darius didn't do so well. He rolled 1 for pips, and all he chose to do was to conservatively make some progress over here. So these 2 elements of Persian auxilia have moved into the bad going over there, and this is what the situation looks like on the remainder of the battlefield. There is no shooting and there's no combat. Alexander rolled 3 for pips and has simply, let's see here, has decided not to move forward. He could have moved forward, moved the whole battle line forward, but decided not to do that, and instead has pivoted the artillery so as to be able to take pot shots at the Persian line. If the Persian line just stays there or stays in that general field of fire, plenty of pot shots there. They will, of course, potentially be threatened by the advancing Persian auxilia, and to use a remaining pep towards mitigating that threat, Alexander has moved the light horse up around the side of the bad going to be able to start to influence what's going on over here. The overall plan is to take pot shots at the Persians to make them pay the price of staying there and building the perfect battle line, as it were, before they advance on the Macedonians. So we shall see. Okay, Darius rolled 4 pips, and so decided to move the auxilia into positions where they can start to threaten the extreme Macedonian flank, but also moving over here closer to the Macedonian artillery So the artillery is going to have to consider its position rather carefully in its turn. Then we also have Darius has simply moved himself forward so as to position himself between the Macedonian artillery and the scythe chariots. The scythe chariots are very vulnerable to artillery. If they draw on the combat results, they're destroyed. So they would be a prime target for the artillery. If Darius is in the way, they can't shoot at scythe chariots. They would have to shoot at Darius, or they could shoot at the knights over here. So anywhere they have a clear shot. Had one pip left and decided to, from here, decided to bring up the hoplites. Unfortunately, that has, of course, this has made now the Persians have a lot of groups going on around the battlefield, but that seemed to be the best thing to do. So there's no shooting because it's the Persian bound, and we go over now to the Macedonian bound. Right, so in the Macedonian bound, Alexander rolled 5 for pips, but didn't actually use all 5, only used 2. As a matter of fact, the Seloy over here moved to the left to be able to protect the artillery, because there's a definite threat coming here from the Persian auxilia, which can come down this way. The Macedonian right flank light horse really doesn't have much it can do because it can't go up here without being coming into the threat zone of this auxiliary unit there. So it's pretty much pinned in place where it is there. And then over here there was a small adjustment where this unit of phalanx just moved to the right to give more support to here, because this one is more likely to be hit by either the Persian scythe chariots or the Persian knights, who have a quick kill potential result on the pikes, so we needed to beef those up a little bit. We now finally have some shooting because the Macedonian artillery has a target. It's the best target for it. It would have liked to have fired at the scythe chariots, but it's been blocked by Darius. So instead it's going to fire at the Persian knights over here. They're a better target than Darius. They are worth 3 against foot, so they've got a factor of 3, and the artillery, of course, is a factor of 4. The red die is Persian, and we'll see what happens. Here we go. Okay, so that means that it's 6 against 5. So the Persians lost that combat. There's no quick kill in place, so they're just going to recoil, and we'll go ahead and do that. Gotta get the blades of the scythe chariot out of the way slightly, and they'll recoil 1 base depth, and we'll put the scythe chariot back. So that's messed up the Persian group there, and I think it's put the knights out of the range now of the definitely out of the range of the artillery. So that was, an interesting result for the Macedonians, but the danger now is, and they're very much aware of it, is what's going to be happening over here. The distance has been calculated so that the Persian auxilia can't contact the Macedonian Seloy in the next bound, but they can certainly pin them. So it's going to start to get interesting very quickly here. And now we're on to the Persian bound. Okay, Persian bound, Darius rolled only 1, so it was a very straightforward move. The auxilia here have moved forward through the bad terrain, bad going, to threaten the Macedonian Seloy. So they're now within their threat zone, so they're pinned. That means that Darius has accepted the fact that he's going to get shot at again next turn, and it won't be the knights. So actually the only target Macedonians have now is Darius himself, so pretty much know that's who they'll be shooting at. But when you roll 1, there's not much you can do. So that's the end of the Persian bound. Okay, Macedonian bound, and Alexander rolled 2 pips, and it's a tough one to call. So he's realizes that he's threatened over here, but we've got to let it play out because he wants to let the artillery fire. So the Siloi is standing off against the oncoming Persian auxilia. The light horse have retired back to this position to try to intervene with the auxilia in some way if that opportunity arises. So that was a move there, and the other move was again a slide sideways of this phalanx unit to brace the attack from the Persians, but also to become a possible reserve to be involved in this conflict over here. Might be able to be of some use. So that's what we've got. So once again, now we've got some Macedonian shooting. So the artillery is going to be firing this time at Darius. Darius is cavalry, which is counts as cavalry in a chariot, light chariot. So that's 3, but +1 because he's a general. So he's worth 4. The artillery are worth 4. There are no quick kills involved in this sort of thing. So let's roll them up. And even dice again. So it's 7 plays 7. So that's a tie. And in the case of a tie, let's see, there is in fact no effect. So nothing happened that time. And it is now it will now be the Persians bound. But before we get to that, let's just have a quick overview of the battlefield so we can see what's going on. Let's get rid of the dice. And there we go. Things are definitely getting interesting on that flank. And the rest of the battlefield has been pretty static for some time. And, well, as they like to say, we shall see. It's the Persian bound, and Darius rolled 4 for pips. So, bit of scope there. What was done was the knights were returned to the main battle line here. That was 1. The mercenary hoplites have been moved forward to this position here, which means, of course, that the Macedonian artillery will be able to shoot at them in their turn if they so desire. And then for 3 and 4, we moved, Darius moved forward. The auxilia, these chaps moved forward here, and these chaps went into contact, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, is the first actual hand-to-hand combat in the game. So off we go. The Persians, it's a very simple combat. The Persians are worth 3, being auxilia, and the Macedonian Siloi, the Agrianians, are worth 2. So it's 3 against 2, and the red die is Persian, and we'll see what we get. Here we go. So the Macedonians won that struggle. Macedonians end up with 2 plus 5 is 7, and the Persians end up with 3 plus 2 is 5. So the Macedonians have won, but they have not doubled the Persians. So the Persians are forced to recoil, and we'll pull them back there at 1 base depth, which takes them back to here. And that's the end of the combat there. So that's the situation that we're looking at. And it is now the Macedonians bound. Alexander rolled 3 pips, not a lot of scope with that, and decided that the only way to protect his extreme right flank was to leave the Siloi where they are. They couldn't, because they're in the threat zone of the auxilia, they can either close with them or stay where they are, or they can withdraw in an entirely straight line backwards up to their full move. So there's not a lot of scope for what they could do. They could have saved themselves by withdrawing completely out of the situation, but that then, of course, would mean that they're abandoning their defense of the artillery. So the only way for any kind of mutual protection, they're going to be, they can certainly be attacked and overlapped in the Persian turn if they've got the pips. the Persians can't flank them. It's slightly too far for them with moving 2 base widths as solid auxilia. It's slightly too far for them to actually get down here and flank them in this position here. But they will be overlapped. So to compensate, the artillery has used 2 pips to redeploy in line as a group with the Siloi. So that means that if they attack the Siloi and they overlap here, the Siloi will be overlapped, but also the auxilia themselves will be overlapped by the artillery. Now that means that the artillery has moved, so it means that it won't get to fire in this bound. And with those 3 pips, 1, 2, and sorry, there was another move, yep, over here. Alexander told the extreme right flank light cavalry they were stationed here to once again start moving around the bad going to be able to pose a threat to the Persian left flank in general, and basically to give these left flank auxilia something to worry about. So that's the end of the Macedonian bound, and there is of course no combat. And in his turn, Darius has rolled 1 pip, not a lot of scope there. A lot of low pip rolls it seems like we're getting, so a small adjustment. Had to, for the time being, reconsider the business of these 2 auxilia units charging the Siloi down here, because if that had been done, the Alexandrian light cavalry would have been able to, without any hindrance, make its way right down the flank. Now, you could argue that if it does do that, looking at the battlefield in general here, the Persians, there's not too much to worry about. The light cavalry could engage with the horde, perhaps, or even pointlessly go after the camp, because light cavalry can't do much about a camp in my experience. But it would be an irritant to the Persians to have them just wandering around down here. So therefore, they've moved the auxilia into a position that exerts a threat zone out in front of them. And as we can see, if we use the marker, that goes out to there. So clearly the Alexandrian light cavalry can't get through that threat zone. They would have to either engage the auxilia or stay out of it. So that's the end of the Persian turn, and there is once again no combat. Well, Alexander actually rolled 4 pips, but he's in a position that he wants to be in, and this is it. And so he decided not to use any of them at all. Right, so what we have then is that finally the artillery is going to be able to shoot, because they didn't move, and they are going to shoot. This time they can't shoot at Darius because he's blocked by the hoplites. They actually can't shoot at the hoplites because they're blocked by the auxilia, and the auxilia are the best target anyway as far as I'm concerned. So they're going to fire at the auxilia with 3, artillery is worth 4. Persian dice is red. Let's see what happens. Clearly the Persians won that, so that means nothing happens. And that's the end of the Macedonian bound.